الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على إمام المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا محمد ذي القدر العظيم، وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل، وارزقنا مفاتح العلم، وأرشدنا إلى مسالك ذوي التوفيق لنتقرب إليك ونكون من أهل قربك ورضاك ومحبتك يا أكرم الأكرمين. Alhamdulillah. In our lessons on Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya, we have been looking at what chapter? We're looking at the section on al-Awamil al-Dakhila ala al-Mubtada wal-Khabar, and we've been looking at inna wa akhawatuha and the ahkam of inna wa akhawatuha. So Omar, I'll be relying on you to share the. So we looked at the ways one distinguishes inna and anna. That when must you use inna and when must you use anna, right? And then, and those are important ahkam. And then we saw ahkam that relate to each of these, like the ittisal of ma az-zaida, which enters upon each of these huruf. How many are they? Inna and its akhawat are 6, right? So we looked at that. And then that ma enters and it negates the action of these huruf except for later, right? When you can have i'mal and ihmal, right? And inna it has come with takhfif, in, right? And then it's usually muhmal. In kullu nafsin lamma alayha hafiz, from Surah Al-Tariq, for example, right? So there we have ilgha, right? So we looked at those. And it's rarely there's i'mal, wa yaqillu i'maluha. And what's the example given? Did he give an example? Wa yaqillu i'maluha. Yeah. So so we looked at that, right? Inna kulla lamma or in kulla lamma, right? And the qira'at, and the qira'at have differed regarding that, right? في قراءة من خفف إن ولما إن كل لما, right? So we stopped there and we'd explain that out. But just to recap so we can know where we're standing right now. Then what does he say? Bismillah. Yeah. So then he tells us, rahimahullah ta'ala, that وَتَلْزَمُ اللَّامِ, right? وَتَلْزَمُ اللَّامِ. Can you read, Omar? Right? وتلزم اللام في خبرها إذا أهملت. Right? that what's meant by uhmilat? Right? i.e. it's not mushaddad, right? When it becomes in, and there's a khilaf in this is discussed by al-Fakihi, that because when it becomes in, right, it has the negative meaning, right? It has the negative meaning, right? So if you have in, then the khabar requires a lam. And what's the example? Does he give an example? Continue reading.
وإن خففت أن مفتوحة بقي إعمالها ولكن يجب أن يكون اسمها ضمير الشأن وأن يكون محذوفا.
Okay. Then there is a case, right? That in خففت أن المفتوحة. So if أن becomes مخفف. So what happens? أن becomes مخفف. So it becomes N. But there's an N. Anna and N are different in terms of what they do, right? But if Anna becomes mukhaffaf, right? It still acts, right? So what does it do? It has an ism and a khabar. The ism is in the nasb, and its khabar is in rafa. But when there's this, when the anna al-maftuha becomes mukhaffaf, يجب أن يكون اسمها ضمير الشأن وأن يكون محذوفا, right? So in this case, and these are rarer usages, right? He sort of, like the previous one, he didn't actually give an example, right? This one, he breaks it down, right? So, an, anna, when it becomes an, and it still acts, but the ism of anna here, that's mukhaffafa, is a dhamir sha'an, like huwa, but it's mahdhuf. What's the example? Does he give an example? Go ahead.
ويجب أن يكون خبرها جملة نحو علم أن سيكون.
Okay. ويجب أن يكون خبرها جملة. Right? That, and its khabar must be a jumla, whether ismiya or fi'liya. And the example he gives is علم أن سيكون. Right? So أن here is مخففة من أن. Right? The ism علم أن سيكون, right, from Surah Al-Muzammil, أن here is مخففة من أن. Right? Its khabar is the ism of أن, which is مخففة here, is a ضمير الشأن أنه. Right? And سيكون is a jumla. سيكون is a فعل فاعل في محل رفع خبر of أن. Right? Right? Here there's some tafsil. You can see it in the later grammarians. So Ibn al-Hajib, author of the Kafiya, and Ibn Malik differed. Ibn Hajib took this opinion that what's mahdhuf has to be a dhamir sha'n, like innahu, for example. Ibn Malik said that, it appears to have said that it's enough that the ism be a dhamir mahdhuf, whether it's dhamir sha'n or other than dhamir sha'n. Right? So these are وإذا خففت كأن بقي إعمالها وجوبا. Then if كأن is made مخفف, so you say كأن, it still acts, it still does إعمال, it behaves like إن وجوبا, right? This is according to the majority, right? Al-Jumhur, right? ويجوز حذف اسمها وذكره. يجوز حذف اسمها وذكره. يجوز ذكره. Right? And in this case, it is permitted to both mention its ism, the ism of كأن al-mukhafafa, or to omit it. Right? And he doesn't cite a Quranic example for this, rather, he cites a line of poetry, right? And كقوله أي كقول الشاعر, right? كأن ظبية تعطو إلى وارق السلم. Right? Now ظبية is related both with رفع, that it's كأن ظبية, that كأن ظبية, ظبية, if you say كأن ظبية, ظبية is the ism of كأن المخففة. كأن ظبية اسم كأن منصوب لأنه من باب إن وأخواتها. Right? But it's also related كأن ظبية, right? That the ism of كأن is محذوف. كأن أي كأنها ظبية, right? And there's other ways, but this is rare. وإذا خففت لكن وإذا خففت لكن وجب إهمالها. If لكن is مخفف, so it becomes لكن, it's necessarily مهمل. It doesn't behave like إن وأخواتها. So these are very rare, so much so that, you know, in some of the instances of this, يعني الرضي رضي الدين الأسترابادي شارح الكافية said لا أعرف لها شاهدا. I don't know any examples for this. Okay? It is a big deal because he's one of the big authorities of the later grammarians. Okay. So these are rarer cases, right? We can't do much for you with this beyond diagram the core, know the core rulings clearly, know, you know, these are the ahkam al-asliya and these are the ahkam al-far'iyya, right? And some of you owe the sharing of the diagramming, the writing out and the diagramming. Please don't excessively test patience. Jazakumullah ta'ala khairan. Public service announcement over. فصل في الكلام على لا التي لنفي الجنس. So فصل. So he says أما لا التي لنفي الجنس فهي التي يراد بها نفي جميع الجنس على سبيل التنصيص. Right? Right? So فصل. Right? So this لا behaves like inna. Right? Right? That's why it's mentioned after inna wa akhawatuha. Number one. Right? He tells us in the matan, right? أما لا التي لنفي الجنس, right? فهي التي يراد بها جميع الجنس على سبيل التنصيص. This is the one in which you are negating the whole category explicitly. You intend negating the whole category explicitly. Right? Now the commentator, Al-Fakihi here, does something quite useful. He tells us that la is of three types. Right? Right? There's a la nahiya. لا تجلس على الطاولة. Right? This is specific to the mudari' and puts it into jazm. Right? That's number one. And then there's a la zaida, and this confuses some people, but it's the Arabs used a la nahi, la zaida. فلا تعمل شيئا. It doesn't have any it doesn't behave as a amil. يعني? And then there is la nafiya. There is a negative la. But والنافية وهي نوعان. داخلة على معرفة. There's a la that enters into the definite. And we'll be seeing that. وعلى نكرة. And there is the la nafiya enters into the definite, and we'll be seeing it in the details of this chapter, and that doesn't make nafi of the jins, etc. And then there is the la that enters into the indefinite. وهي ضربان عاملة عمل ليس. Yeah, there is a la that negates, but it behaves like laysa. Right? And we've taken it. Right? In bab laysa. Right? وعامل عمل إن وتسمى لا التبرئة. And there's another la that behaves like inna. And this is also called la التبرئة, but this is what the Kufans called it. Right? The Basrans the la of being free of something. But that's generally Kufan terminology. The Basrans generally call it la النافية للجنس, or la التي لنفي الجنس. Right? So he tells us it's the one التي يراد بها جميع الجنس على سبيل التنصيص. The لا النافية للجنس negates the whole category explicitly. So here, this is why you could diagram la that there's three types of la, right? So there's la al-nahiya, the prohibiting la, la tajlis, la tadkhul, la. And that is, we took, enters in the mudari', puts it in jazm. There's a la zaida, doesn't do anything, right? I'rabically. Then there is the la that is nafiya, right? The negative la. The la nafiya can enter into the definite, right? The ma'rifah, and that, but the definite is not a category, right? So we'll see what it does there. And then there is the la that enters into the indefinite. The la that enters into the indefinite is of two types. The one that behaves like laysa and the one that behaves like inna. What does laysa do? Yeah, give an example of laysa. Laysa Zaydun qa'iman. Right? Right? Of course, but here this la enters into a nakira, into an indefinite. Right? So it doesn't enter the names of people. La rajulun mawjudan. Here, what is it? The la is behaving like laysa. Right? Entered into an indefinite, and it can behave like laysa, and it's not li nafi al-jins. It indicates a certain meaning. And then there is the categorical negative la. It enters into, so it's li nafi, it's for negation. It enters into the nakira, right? And it behaves like inna. But this, now the la that behaves like laysa, it's not used so often. La rajulun mawjudan, and if you review, you would see what we discussed about its being more rare, right? If you use it in modern Arabic, people think you just got it wrong. But there isn't a categorical denial. There isn't a categorical denial, right? So, the difference between la al-nafiya lil-jins, right? The la that negates the whole category. That's why al-Hattab in the Mutammima says على سبيل التنصيص, explicitly negates the whole category. You say لا رجل في الدار, okay? You're negating it absolutely. See, it's an absolute negation. You say لا رجل موجودا, okay? It does negate, but as the commentator tells us, على سبيل الاحتمال والظهور. لا رجل موجود means this is the la النافية, right? Behaving like inna. Does nasb of the ism and rafa of the khabar, correct? Here, there's an explicit negation. There's no man whatsoever present. لا رجل موجودا, there does not appear to be a man present. Right? So you can see in fiqh the difference. Right? But you make a note that the la that acts like laysa is much more rare, right? So don't practice it at home, kind of thing. Right? So he tells us وَتَعْمَلُ عَمَلَ إِنَّ فَتَنْصِبُ الْإِسْمَ وَتَرْفَعُ الْخَبَرَ بشرط أن يكون اسمها وخبرها نكرتين وأن يكون اسمها متصلا بها. So the la التي لنفي الجنس, this la that is of categorical negation behaves like inna, so it puts its ism, right? So this la enters into a jumla ismiya. Of course, there's an issue, which is why Fakihi words it carefully, that the asl in the mubtada is what? That it be ma'rifah. But this la enters into what? La nafi al-jins. It's nakira, because we want to negate the category. Right? So originally the sentence would be ar-rajulu mawjudun. Right? The man is present. Right? Ar-rajulu mawjudun. But now we want to negate that not only is that man not there, so if you want to say that man is not there, say laysa ar-rajulu mawjudan. Right? For example, right? There's multiple ways you could negate his presence. But you want to say there's no man present whatsoever, that's where you use la nafiya lil jins. Right? You could also use the la that acts like laysa, but then it would act like laysa. So this la, and we're not going to talk about that one again for now. So the la nafi lil jins puts the ism into a khabar, into the ism, which is originally would have been the mubtada, into nasb wa tarfa'u al khabar, which is and the wisdom of it behaving in this way is that what does la here do? La rajula mawjudun. Right? Al-Fakihi tells us that because this la is li ta'keed al-nafi, it emphasizes the negation. Right? And right? So it behaves like inna because inna emphasizes the relationship, the affirmative relationship between two things. Inna ar-rajula mawjudun. Right? What does in? You say ar-rajulu mawjudun, the man is present. We say inna ar-rajula mawjudun, what are you doing? Making ta'keedun nisba bayna al-mubtada wal-khabar ijaban. When you say inna, you're emphasizing the relationship here between the mubtada and the khabar. Inna ar-rajula mawjudun. Indeed, he truly is present. Right? But the la is emphasizing the negation. But the meaning of emphasis of the relationship between the two component parts, mubtada, khabar, mawdu', mahmul, musnad ilayhi, is being made, but in negation. Right? So that's the wisdom. But there are two conditions. Right? Right? Now you can count them as two or you can count them as four. Right? So Al-Fakihi considered them four. Right? The immediate two are, firstly, بشرط أن يكون اسمها وخبرها نكرتين. Both the ism and the khabar have to be indefinite. لا رجل موجود, for example. Right? Both the ism and the khabar have to be indefinite. وأن يكون اسمها متصلا بها, and that its ism be connected with the la. Right? These are the two fundamental conditions. The other things are derivative. Right? So he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, that فإن كان اسمها مضافا أو مشبها بالمضاف فهو معرب منصوب. Right? نحو لا صاحب علم ممقوت. Right? Now the This is subtlety, but it's a reality, right? That the ism, if it's actually mudaf or resembles the mudaf, then it is actually, the ism of la is considered mu'rab. And if it's mu'rab, it takes a grammatical state of nasb. For example, you say la sahiba ilmin mamqut. Right? So sahiba ilm, sahib here, sahiba ilm is mudaf ilayhi. Right? It is the khabar. It is the ism. The khabar is mamqut. La sahiba ilmin mamqut. No person of knowledge is reviled. ولا طالعا جبلا حاضر. Right? This is shabihan bil mudaf. This resembles a mudaf. Right? لا طالعا جبل حاضر. No one who climbs, who is mountain climbing, is present. Right? طالعا جبلا. Right? Because جبل طالع is what? طالع is an اسم فاعل. It can take what? A maf'ul. But the maf'ul is here with the ism fa'il is shabih bil mudaf. Why? Because يتم به معناه, because it completes the meaning. So it resembles the mudaf. It's not an actual idafa. Right? Right? So what is the شبيه بالمضاف والمشبه بالمضاف هو ما اتصل به شيء من تمام معناه. What resembles the mudaf is that which completes its meaning. Right? So لا صاحب علم ممقوت لا طالعا جبلا حاضر. Right? والمشبه بالمضاف, that which resembles the mudaf, is هو ما اتصل به شيء من تمام معناه. Right? Like طالعا here. Right? طالعا جبل. لا طالع, because if you say لا طالعا حاضر, no one climbing is present. Because to understand طالع, climbing, in Arabic at least, what is being climbed? Because, because climbing, طلع means to rise. You can use it for people, but also for things, for the sun. طلعت شمس من أحب بليل. Right? As the poet said. طلع البدر. Right? But you would need to know either who is rising or what they are rising upon. Right? Otherwise, it doesn't complete the meaning. Right? So that's in the case of the ism. If it's mudaf or shabihan bil mudaf, it's considered mu'rab here. وإن كان مفردا, if the ism is mufrad, and here by mufrad it means that which is not mudaf or shabih bil mudaf. Right? Right? أو جمع تكسير, or right? Do you have أو جمع تكسير in the matan? Shouldn't be. Shouldn't be, right? Yeah, it shouldn't be. Some copies mention this أو جمع تكسير, right? It shouldn't be part of the matan. If the ism of the la al-nafi lil-jins is mufrad, and by mufrad, what's meant here? That it's not mudaf or shabih bil-mudaf. Regardless of whether the singular word is يعني for al-muwahhad lafzan, right? If it's singular in word only or in word and right? Or it'd be a singular word indicating a plural, right? Bunya ala al-fath. Then it's considered to be mabni ala al-fath, right? So you would say so he says okay, بني على ما ينصب به لو كان معربا. Do you have that? Okay, there are differing copies here. Okay? Okay. 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 So let's read from one, because actually this copy confused two paragraphs. There's repetition. Okay, Bismillah. So وإن كان اسمها مفردا بني على ما ينصب به لو كان معربا، ونعني بالمفرد هنا وفي باب النداء ما ليس مضافا ولا شبيها بالمضاف. Good. If its ism is singular, it's considered to be in bina with the same sign as it would have were it mu'rab. Right? And what's meant by وَنَعْنِي بِالْمُفْرَدْ هنا, and what's meant by the mufrad here is, and likewise in bab al-nida, which is coming up, is مَا لَيْسَ مُضَافًا وَلَا شَبِيهًا بِالْمُضَاف. That which is not in actual idafa, لا صاحب علم, for example, or resembling the mudaf like لا طالعا جبلا, etc. وَإِنْ كَانَ مُثَنًّا أَوْ مَجْمُوعًا, even if the singular word is in meaning dual or plural. Right? Because here it is considered to be mufrad. That's the same as what you have. So then he lays out the implications of that. وَإِنْ كَانَ مُفْرَدًا, so this is just laying out the details. وإن كان مفردا أو جمع تكسير بني على الفتح نحو لا رجل حاضر ولا قوم في الدار ولا رجل حاضرون ولا رجال حاضرون. Right? So if it, so therefore, right? فإن كان, فإن كان, some copies have فإن. This is from a reliable copy of the Mutammima. فإن, because this fa is للتفريع, right? Because it lays out a principle, right? That إن كان اسمها مفردا بني على ما ينصب به, that if its ism is mufrad, it's in bina on the same thing that it would be in nasb with. So then he makes tafriya. So the fa is wajih, right? Right? فإن كان, right? I mean, it can be also well, فإن, right? كان مفردا أو جمع تكسير بني على الفتح. If it's mufrad or جمع تكسير بني على الفتح. لا رجل حاضر لا رجال حاضرون. وإن كان مثنى أو جمع مذكر سالما بني على الياء نحو. And if it's dual or the sound male plural, it's in بناء with a ياء نحو لا رجلين في الدار. There are no two men in the house. ولا قائمين في السوق. And there's no people standing in the market. أعاد الله أسواق العالم إلى الخير. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala return the marketplaces of this world to good. ووجهنا إلى سوق الآخرة. May Allah direct us towards the marketplace of the hereafter. يا رب. وإن كان جمع مؤنث سالما بني على الكسرة. And if it's جمع مؤنث سالم, the sound female plural, it's in بناء with a كسرة نحو لا مسلمات حاضرات. لا مسلمات حاضرات. right? لا مسلمات عفوا. right? لا مسلمات حاضرات. It's مبني على الكسر. Why? Because the بناء, because it's مبني, right? It's right? وقد يبنى على الفتح. There is a minority, right? And it's discussed by Maulana al-Fakihi and others, right? وقد هذا للتقليل, right? وقد يبنى على الفتح, right? Right? And why did they right? They considered a number of considerations related to it. You can look at them in Fakihi, right? The important thing here to appreciate is that the la التي لنفي الجنس enters into, what is it? Into the indefinite. Right? So it's negative. It's للنفي. It's negative. It enters into the indefinite. Right? And there are two kinds of la النفي. There's one that behaves like laysa, and that's rare. And there's that which behaves like inna, and that's the asl. That's the nafi al-jins, i.e. على وجه التنصيص. That then, if its ism is mudaf or shabih bil mudaf, they consider it to be mu'rab. If it's singular, it's considered to be mabni. So it behaves the same way, but it's considered mabni for grammatical considerations that I don't want to unpack. But you can read about them. They're mentioned both by Faki and al-Ahdal. And there's more coming regarding that. Okay. وإذا تكررت لا, right? And this happens, right? So if the la is repeated, right? نحو لا حول ولا قوة جاز في النكرة الأولى الفتح والرفع. Right? Right? So this is إذا تكررت لا. So if the la is repeated, right? If the la is repeated, right? With مع مفرد النكرة, with a singular that's indefinite, right? So in لا النافية للجنس here, like لا حول ولا قوة, like, you know, this expression لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله, you could in its ism, you could say it with a fath, which would be لا حول ولا قوة. والرفع, you could also say لا حول ولا قوة. Right? والرفع أي لا حول ولا قوة. Right? So this you would do well to diagram, right? And that's why, like, it's best not to come to class as if we're on a picnic, right? فإن فتحها. Now, if you put the first one in fath, so you could diagram this, right? That if there's in تكررت الله, there are two options, right? Regarding the ism, it can be either with fath, لا حول ولا قوة, like as we're accustomed to there, and it's مفتوح, and لا حول is, what is it? It's mufrad, right? It's not مضاف or شبيه بالمضاف, right? So it's that it بالفتح, it's مبني على الفتح, right? But if you فإن فتحها, now if you say لا حول, what can you do with the second half? جاز في الثانية ثلاثة أوجه. Right? Right? In the second half, لا حول, if you say لا حول, you could do three things with the second. الفتح والنصب والرفع. You could put it in فتحة and نصب and رفع. Say لا حول ولا قوة, or قوة or قوة. And each has a distinct i'rab. Right? Right? And each has distinct meanings, right? So if you say fath, right, that both are لا حول كائن ولا قوة كائنة إلا بالله, right? So you have two, there, the first لا is نافية للجنس, and the second لا is نافية للجنس, right? And it's معطوف, right? Right? أي لا حول موجود ولا قوة موجودة إلا بالله. Right? And there's a few different ways the sentences can be interpreted. And you can also do nasb. Right? So which would be لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. Right? How would that be? That the second la is زائدة to emphasize the nafi, right? And there's i'rab of it, right? And you could also do rafa, right? That it's زائدة, and it's not معطوف, but it's ابتداء. لا حول ولا قوة, right? إلا بالله. And it changes the meaning slightly, right? But of course, in what's related, you say it as is related. So in the adhkar, the asl is that it's come, لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. So one says it as has been related, right? Unless there is ثبوت for any of the other awjuh. This is mentioned تمثيلا, right? So if the first one is la hawla, then there are three possibilities for the second, right? And the first is the most common. وإن رفعت النكرة الأولى. If you put the first nakira, la hawla, but you put it in rafa, la hawlun, right? 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 جاز لك في الثانية وجهان الرفع والفتح. You can say لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. Right? So one is to put the second in rafa as well. Right? So you put لا حول, then the second would be ولا قوة. Right? And there you are, the meaning changes. Right? The meaning changes. Right? يعني الرفع يعني so that the second لا is زائد, right? And you can also say لا حول ولا قوة. Right? And that would sound, all of these awjuh, their sound and they've come in classical usage, but in modern Arabic, you just stick to the first of these things, لا حول ولا قوة, like in other statements as well, right? You know, you say لا رجل ولا امرأة في الدار, right? Don't try any of these other fancy ones. They have their, each has their appropriate i'rab. If you want to take good notes, you can jot them down from Fakihi or from Ahdal. The reason I don't want to go into it is because the issue of in i'rab al-jumal, al-ma'tufa ala al-jumal, that would take us way outside the scope of the lesson right now. وَإِنْ عَطَفْتَ على اسم لا وإن عطفت على اسم لا ولم تتكرر لا وجب فتح النكرة الأولى. Right? If it's put in عطف, if two things are put in عطف on the ism of لا, but you did not repeat the لا, وجب فتح النكرة الأولى. Then the first nakira has to be in فتح. وجاز في النكرة الثانية الرفع والنصب. Right? You say لا حول ولا قوة وقوة. Right? That's what you have, right?
I don't have a second لا حول ولا قوة.
Yeah. كذا. Right? لا حول و yeah, that's what it should. Right? If عطفت على اسم لا ولم تتكرر لا, and the la is not repeated, right? Every copy is shady, subhanallah. Alhamdulillah, it's good. It keeps you awake, right? So you said لا حول, you make عطف to it, but don't repeat the la. Then the first has to be in fath. لا حول. Wa, the second could be قوة or قوة. Right? And it changes the meaning, of course, right? Right? It changes the meaning. Why? وإن عطفت على وإن عطفت ولم تتكرر لا وجب فتح النكرة الأولى. The reason the first has to be مفتوح is the only cause that the لا النافية would not be or that which looks like a لا النافية would not make its amal, it's when there's another la after it. Only then did the Arabs not make i'mal of the first one. Right? Because of the tikrar of the la. Okay, that's the first thing. Now, but if you say la hawla wa quwwatun or quwwatan, right? Because there's no repeated la. Right? Right? So here you say la hawla wa quwwatun. You're negating the hawl, but you're affirming quwwa. Right? Right? So there, la hawla wa quwwatun illa billah. Right? بالعطف على محل لا الأولى مع اسمها. والنصب لا حول وقوة على محل اسم لا أو على لفظه. Right? So here, so in one, the عطف is on the jumla of لا and how, يعني. Right? So you say لا حول وقوة. This is now a fresh عطف. With what, so the عطف is, if you say لا حول وقوة, it's عطف on the place of لا with its ism. Right? لا حول وقوة. Right? So the عطف is وقوة, the عطف is to the لا and what's after it. Say لا حول وقوة, the عطف is to the place of the ism of لا. Right? وإذا نعت اسم لا بنعت مفرد. That's what you have. وإذا نعت اسم لا بنعت مفرد. Right? If you يعني نعت إيه وصفت, if you give the ism of لا with a na'at that is mufrad, لم يفصل بين النعت والمنعوت فاصل. ولم, there's a واو missing, right? ولم يفصل, right? Correct? ولم يفصل بين النعت والمنعوت فاصل نحو لا رجل ظريف جالس. جاز في النعت الفتح والنصب والرفع. لا رجل ظريف, ظريفا or ظريف. لا رجل ظريف. Right? So if the ism of لا has a na'at, has a sifa that is singular, and the na'at and man'ut does not have any gap between them, then the na'at, in this case dharif, could have a fatha or a nasb or a rafa. Each is understood grammatically in a different manner, right? The fath, because the sifa is min tatimmat al-mawsuf, right? The sifa completes the mawsuf. So it behaves like it. Nasb, because its place is the ism of la is here, it's mufrad, so it's mabni, but you say it's mabni ala al-fath fi mahal nasb ism. So you say لا رجل ظريف because the موصوف, the صفة تتبع الموصوف. So لا رجل ظريفة, right? So in that sense, it follows it. But the nasb لا رجل, لا رجل, رجل is مفرد. So لا رجل is اسم of لا مبني على الفتح لأنه مفرد واسم لا and but it is في محل نصب of اسم لا, right? So it's itself مبني but it's in the place of نصب. So the صفة, the أصل in the صفة it's معرب. So insofar as it is صفة of that whose place is nasb, you could say لا رجل ظريفا, right, with nasb. Now the third case is more far-fetched, but it is you can also say لا رجل ظريف جالس. Okay? ظريف is a sifa of رجل, but here it is in rafa in consideration of the place of the la, right? Because the la is, because it's as it were opening the jumla, its placeholder is of rafa, right? So it's explained, right? حملا على محل لا مع اسمها, because la and its ism considered together were like the mubtada. So it, right? So there's a mubtada which the la demolished, but together la and its ism, as it were, are in the place of the mubtada, which is marfu'. So you can say la rajula in square brackets. So that's la and ism la, which is mansoob. But these together are in the place of what? In the structures of the jumal of the Arabic language. La and its ism are in the place of the mubtada. The mubtada is marfu' because it's the umdatul jumla. Right? There's mubtada and a khabar. We have a khabar here. Where is the mubtada? La and its ism have taken the place of. So that's why la rajul. That's, the Arabs are smart. Like the way the Arabs spoke, it's evidence of deep thinking. But they're thinking grammatically, but bit-taba', which is min mahasin al-Arab. They mentions salamatu tab'ihim wa salamatu aqlihim wa salamatu lisanihim. And these three are interrelated. The soundness of their temperament, their thinking, and their tongue. Because a sound mind comes from a sound temperament. And the sign of a sound temperament and a sound mind is a sound tongue. Potentially. So that's the rafa. Now we don't want to overanalyze it, but I hope you understood the concept. The rafa, la rajula dharifun, insofar as that the sifa here, jalisun, jalis is the khabar of la. Right? Insofar as that la and the rajul, which is la al-nafiya and ism la al-nafiya, together are in the place of the mubtada. Right? So dharif is a na'at for that composite. So that's the third possibility, the rafa. فإن فصل بين النعت والمنعوت فاصل أو كان النعت غير مفرد جاز الرفع والنصب فقط نحو لا رجل جالس ظريف أو ظريفا ولا رجل طالعا أو طالع جبلا حاضر. Right? But if there is between the na'at and the man'ut a fasil, such as the khabar of the la, like لا رجل جالس ظريف, because ظريف is a na'at for what? ظريف is seemingly. Seemingly is not the sitting, but the person. Right? So لا نافية, رجل لا رجل, this is اسم لا مبني على الفتح في محل نصب, في محل نصب. Right? جالس is the خبر of لا النافية مرفوع. ظريف is what? Is not of رجل, and it would be ظريف. Why? باعتبار, the same اعتبار. It's يعني ظريف is a not of رجل, and it's مرفوع باعتبار that لا and رجل together are in the place of the مبتدا, or ظريفا, because it's a not to the place of the ism of لا, which is منصوب. لا رجلا طالعا أو طالع جبلا حاضر, same. وإذا جهل خبر لا وجب ذكره. If the خبر of لا is unknown, it must be mentioned. كما مثلنا, like the examples before. She said لا رجل. What do you mean by لا رجل? You have to mention it. كقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا أحد أغير من الله. Right? And if you say لا أحد من الله, it would have no meaning. Because what is the khabar? When it's unknown or unclear by the context, it has to be mentioned. وَإِذَا عُلِمَ, but if the khabar of لا النافية is known, فَالْأَكْثَرُ حَذْفُهُ, then generally, in the overwhelming case, it is omitted. Right? Right? So for example, in the Quran, فَلَا فَوْتَ, right? أي لهم, ولا ضير أي علينا, ولا حول ولا قوة أي لنا. Right? Right? So this, of course, this serves a, and you do well, you know, these two examples, لا فوت and لا ضير, fall under doing i'rab, right? You know, from فلا فوت from Surah Saba verse 51, لا ضير from Surah Shu'ara verse 50. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. But this serves a rhetorical purpose as well. Why? Because if you have a la nafiya and the khabar is mentioned, then what do you understand from it? That there was a need to mention the khabar. Right? So that gives a point of reflection. So for example, the Prophet ﷺ, it's saying, لا أحد أغير من الله. أغير, there's none who has more غيرة, right? Who has more protective jealousy than Allah. There was a reason that needed to be mentioned. Right? It needed to be mentioned. Whereas لا حول ولا قوة, يعني لنا or موجودة, يعني إلا بالله, there it's clear. Now if it's not clear to you, then you should reflect. And then he says, now, so لا نافية للجنس enters upon the nakira, right? So we broke down the la to begin with, right? La, there's nahiya, zaida, and nafiya. The la nafiya enters upon either the ma'rifah, and we said it's coming and we're at it, or it enters upon the nakira. The nakira, just to recap the chapter, the la nafiya that enters upon the nakira can act like laysa. And what function does it fulfill there? It does not have a categorical negation. Okay? La rajulun fi dar. It does not appear to be a man in the dar. La rajulun mawjudan. But as we mentioned, that's rare, and review laysa for that, right? We don't want to spell everything out the whole time. And then you have la that is nafiya, enters upon the mufrad, and ta'malu amala inna, and this is the one that the whole chapter was about, la nafiya lil jins. أي على وجه التنصيص, explicit negation of the whole category. Here, the rules that we looked at. Now, of course, one thing before we look at the la that enters upon the ma'rifah is that la an-nafiya lil jins. One is and Allah tests us even by the lughat al-khitab. لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. Right? And ibtila, an ibtila, they say ibtila is both takwini and taklifi and tashri'i. Right? The test of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is both in the ahkam at-takwiniyya. That Allah's testing is both in the ibtila, in the trials of existence, of taqween, of the hukm at-takwini, of the divine creational command. But the ibtila is also in the hukm at-tashri'i. Allah tests us, right? And from the test is that there are a lot of negations, right? In both the Quran and in the Sunnah of our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there's hikmah in that, and there is opportunity in that, right? So, for example, and there's so many of the laws, right? And they bring out, some of them are opportunities, right? La imana liman la amanata lah, etc. There's many negations like that, right? La imana, what is implicit, right? But there are others that relate to ahkam. So there's things that relate to warnings or opportunities. La imana liman la amanata lah. لا دين لمن لا عهد له. لا صلاة إلا بفاتحة الكتاب. Right? There's many negations, and what is implicit? Right? That's part of the taklif. لا ربا. Right? And this is a mursal of makhul, of course. It's not a marfu' hadith. بين مسلم وحربي في دار الحرب. But what is the khabar there? Right? And that brings out, but a lot of people proceed, even some ulama proceed, not considering okay, there's an ism of the la and there's a khabar. What is it? It's implicit. Do thy grammar. Right? Do thy grammar. Okay. That's just a public service announcement. فإن دخلت لا على معرفة أو فصل بينها. So if the la enters upon the definite, then it doesn't fulfill its function. أو فصل بينها وبين اسمها فاصل, or there's a separator between the ism, between it and its ism. Right? لا في الدار رجل. Right? وجب إهمالها. Then the لا النافية does not fulfill its grammatical purpose. ووجب رفع ما بعدها. And what's after the لا must be in رفع. على أنه مبتدأ وخبر. لا رجل لا في الدار رجل. Right? So you'd say لا في الدار رجل موجود, so to speak. Right? وجب إهمالها وجب رفع ما بعدها على أنه مبتدأ وخبر. ووجب تكرارها. And in this case, if there's a statement in عطف to it, you have to put another لا. You can't omit the لا. Right? نحو لا زيد في الدار ولا عمر ولا في الدار رجل ولا امرأة. Right? So لا زيد في الدار, this is the example of it entering upon a معرفة. لا زيد في الدار. Right? ولا عمر. You can't say لا زيد في الدار وعمر. Right? ولا في الدار رجل, this is a معرفة, but there's a فاصل between the لا and the ism of لا. So you say لا في الدار رجل ولا امرأة, but you have to repeat the لا. So these are the أحكام of the لا if it enters upon the معرفة or there's a فاصل between them, they behave in the same way. Then we reach the third type of what enters into the third type of nawasikh, which is dhanna and its sisters, right? And that's the last part of and that would take us, so we looked at the marfu'at, and then so we looked at the mubtada and khabar, the nawasikh of the mubtada and khabar, which are three, kana akhawatuha, and then inna akhawatuha, and then we have now dhanna wa akhawatuha. So we'll look at dhanna wa akhawatuha, and then, and so we'll take those next, and then we get to the mansubat. Right? The mansubat. And this is easy sailing. The mansubat, right? But, inshallah, so we'll take dhanna wa akhawatuha next class, and we may look to begin at least the opening of the bab of al-mansubat min al-asma', because he mentions there are 15. How many are mentioned in the Ajrumiyya? Good. Yeah, but how many does he mention? Yeah. Yeah, there's a numbering issue in the Ajrumiyya there, right? Arguably. Okay. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.